It's like 3 in the morning, so there's not any McDonald's eating amigos to bash my door. Just raccoons. Raccoons don't do that though. Maybe. Maybe if they thought my car was a trash can, which they actually might now because it's so banged up from all the door bashing. Who knows? So, to continue, we'll catch up more tomorrow, Jacob. My father said, I want to make you feel welcome here, baby. Just tell me if you need anything. I'm here to talk, if you want to. Andrea added. Thanks, guys, I said. After my shower, I settled into my temporary bed in the blue and yellow room with a pen and a fresh new pad. I ran my fingertips over the smooth grain of the sheet. It was pure, innocent, and ready to be molded by the sculptor. The pen hit the paper. I began my story. I didn't know what to write, or even if I could, but it came. My blockage opened. The words filled the pages, one after another. But I didn't choose the words. It was as if I was channeling some divine source, locked within myself. I had no control. The scenes just opened up before me on the page. I let the rain pour, stream. My name is Yusuf, and my mother was a theosophist. But everyone thought she was a loon. Not many people knew what theosophy is, and I don't imagine I would either if I hadn't been raised by one of its adherents. Theosophists believe in the occult and all manner of other such extraordinary things. My mother believed in Atlantis and spiritual evolution. The Hyperborean people who resided far to the north of ancient Greece. The power of blood and reincarnation. She had faith in extrasensory perception, and she was completely devoted to the Cottingley fairy photos. Mother knew that fairies and goblins, elves and dwarves all existed. Not only existed, but still managed to survive in huge numbers. She claimed that when she was little, a fairy named Dabathy was her best friend. My father, being the stubborn, rationalizing man that he was, told me before he passed away that Mother only created such fantastic tales because her father was an abusive drunkard. Fairies and other such nonsense, he said, was just her way of coping. He said this with a remote pity and eyes that knew nothing. But my mother, the theosophist, believed in the unseen, and my father, if not completely supportive of my mother's eccentricities, loved her for her oddness. As my adult years settled in on me and I began to feel the cramp of a certain disdain for my aging body, I was plunged into this imaginary world alongside my mother. She had become a little girl again, under her bleached white bedsheets. My brothers and I had been forced to admit her into permanent care center for the elderly. Her mind was little more than mush, and Dabathy, my mother claimed, visited her once again. I responded to this with a half smile of embarrassment, but my wide-eyed little nieces had yet to discard their childhood beliefs in things like fairies, and they bombarded her with fact-hungry questions. Do they wear shoes? What color are they? Do they die? Her ravings had gotten more and more crazy every day, but also eerily more coherent. She was able to spout off times and dates of fairy meetings from years ago, as if she were referencing some deep and infinite filing system in her brain. She spoke plainly to Dabithy as if she were a little girl again, in the very room with her. Sometimes she lapsed into fits of what I recognized as religious tongues, or the holy prayer language. Having gone to several Pentecostal prayer meetings in my youth, Mother claimed it was the language of the fairies. She spoke of a day to come, always telling us the date, which was invariably 9 days away. The psychiatrists and neurologists that we visited all came up empty-handed. The shrinks imagined, based on our discussions, that she was just blocking out repressed memories from her childhood that were beginning to bubble to the surface while she was resting on her deathbed. This could have been possible, but the whole thing was beginning to seem too intricately interwoven to be just randomly regurgitated memories. I stayed there by her bedside many long nights, with a notebook and a pen in my lap. She would wake up at 3:03 a.m. every night, on the dot. Her eyes would open like a flash and dilate widely. After a few seconds, her pupils would grow so big they nearly eclipsed her irises. Her vacant stare would shoot to the corner of the ceiling behind her bed, and she would lapse into tongues again. I wrote down what I could, though most was so fast and indecipherable that not even a trained court reporter could have documented it thoroughly. B'nai ha-Elohim vas dein Dabithy, she said with a quick nodding bow from her frail neck. This was how it always started, like the opening of a forgotten prayer to some pagan deity. Certain words would stick out when she talked to that corner in her tiny room, primarily Wotan. This word was said with a certain amount of reverence, and the speech would slow to carefully enunciate. One night, when the fairies were visiting, my mother started carving symbols into her skin with her fingernails. We had to file her nails to the quick to keep her from scratching herself, but the symbols still somehow returned night after night. One was of 3 interlocking triangles, almost forming a Christian triquetra. This design resonated somewhere deep inside of me. 3 corners, 3 shapes, 9 sides. This symbol was familiar, alarmingly so, but I couldn't place it. I drew it alongside my other notes, but that was as far as my mind journeyed down that road. That was until a new nurse, a tall blonde woman named Sylvia, recognized it. Hrungnir's heart, she said. The knot of Odin. The knot of the slain. They would carve it and the sacred runes upon the headstone of the dead in northern Europe back in the Viking Age. It is called the Valknut. How in the world do you know that? I said. I studied ancient religion in college. Well, what religion is that? Norse mythology. I reflected on this for a time. I sat quietly by my mother's side as she slept. She had been up late the previous night, talking to fairies. Sylvia cleaned my mother up and wiped the thin, dried blood from my mother's freshly carved valknut. Does Norse mythology have stories about fairies? I asked, after a long silence. Well, not exactly, she replied. I was relieved. According to the myth, there are beings called light elves who dwell in one of the 9 worlds that hangs from the tree of life. Humans dwell in the middle of this tree, in the realm of Midgard. Sometimes the light elves are as big as humans, some even bigger, but many are about the same size as fairies, and supposedly have wings like fairies too. She answered as if we were having the most mundane conversation, strolling in the park. My expression grew grim, my thoughts dark, connecting mental puzzle pieces. Drawing a map in my mind to a place I had never been, but I now realized that I had known since birth. You don't actually believe this drivel, do you? I asked, with a casual chuckle, careful not to offend. As a matter of fact, I do. I'm a neo-pagan. She looked at me with a sharp, menacing glance as she folded my mother's linens. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. You aren't sorry. None of you are, she whispered scathingly. Sitting there with that cross hanging from your neck. You people are all the same. Your truth is the only truth. Well, I'll give you this. There is no religion greater than the actual truth. Your kind has been pushing their beliefs on. Her voice trailed off into nothing as she managed to suppress her frustration and hatred in order to maintain some semblance of professionalism. I found her rude and demeaning, but at the same time, in my finite sanity, hysterical. A laughter, brooding and stuffed with dementia, escaped me and attacked every inch of that room like an angry spirit. I jumped when I heard it pass between my lips, and so did Sylvia. Coldness seized my spine. Mother lolled her head to the side. Halloik, Tochter, Dessen, Heiligen, Haken Cruises, Bevakasha, Sliksa, Lehitra Ot. Your mother said something, Sylvia said. I know, she's been speaking like that for days. It almost sounds as if she is speaking in tongues. I stated plainly, overcome with exhaustion and failed attempts to decipher the language. No, she's speaking German. At least the first part sounded German. A confused dialect. But my mother has never been there before in her life. She doesn't know German. She wouldn't be able to learn a completely different language. She just isn't that smart. She can't speak German. Well, she is. It sounded something like, "Hello, daughter of the sacred swastika." It makes no sense, I know. But that is something like what I heard. I lived in Germany for a few summers. I'm telling you, that's the first part. The second part, though, it sounded unlike anything I've ever heard. She's just blathering. I'm sure you just thought you heard something like that. She couldn't possibly have orchestrated a sentence like that. She can't pull off knowledge of a language out of thin air. Sylvia was shaken up and far too busy to continue the conversation. She finished tending to my mother and left. As she exited, she said, "Well, Fizbul Wotan certainly pulled the knowledge of a language out of thin air." Wait, what did you say? Who is Wotan? I got up out of that soft-backed leather chair and raced around the corner to get some answers out of that Norse nurse. I was confronted by an empty hall. Behind me, another empty hall. I checked all the doors near my mother's room, but only found sleeping old men and women. No Sylvia. Nowhere in the entire building. When I asked the front desk about her, they said that no one by that name or description worked there. Coming to the conclusion that I was going loony, like my poor old mother, I retreated back to her room. She was asleep when I came in, but awake as I sat down in that creaky armchair. "So you met the elf, did you, Yusuf?" "What, mother?" "The elf. You met her, didn't you?" "No, mother, it was just a nurse," I said, not quite certain with myself. "No, son, it's elven magic. The fairy folk can do that. They can take on human form, you know." "Yes, mother, you have told me." I rolled my eyes and played with my hands in my lap. "Yes, I know I have told you, but maybe you will listen this time. Don't be a fool." I acted as though I was humoring her as we talked, but her delusions began to draw me in. I recorded her mythic wisdom with a devout honesty. I wanted to cling onto her madness. I could only keep her if I understood her. My notebook was full by the time she went missing. I awoke from a deep sleep at precisely 3:03 that night, conditioned from recording my mother's nocturnal lunacies. I awoke beside an empty bed. I hoped she was in the restroom. She wasn't. She wasn't even in the building. My family, the nursing staff, and the local police department searched tirelessly for her day and night. It wasn't until a suffocating and depressing 9 days had passed that we found her body. She was dangling upside down from the most massive ash tree I have ever seen, from a noose wrapped around her ankle. The police officers brought me to the scene to ID the body before they cut her down. Her face was a swollen blueberry. Juices trickled out of her ears and eyes. Her nightgown was soiled and caked with blood from mysterious tiny wounds at her sides, like she were prodded to death with a million needles while she hung breathless. On her bared chest was the scarred knot of Odin, the knot of the slain. She reminded me of Jesus Christ, hanging there from that tree with her side bleeding from a Roman's spear. I was crouched at her feet like the Holy Virgin, sobbing like a baby, absorbed in God and the totality of man and the spirit. When they cut her down, I was Michelangelo's Pieta, holding her broken body in my arms. I made a vow then and there to ascertain the actual truth from her ravings, and not fall victim to them like she did. My mind opened up to the possibility of the unknown. As I held her on the blood-dampened soil, I saw it. A stick, no bigger than a thorn, with a tip stained red. I picked it up stealthily with a handkerchief and tucked it away in my vest pocket. Later that month, after the funeral, a very long and thorough police investigation turned up nothing, contributing to my mother's hanging, and legal recourse was taken against the nursing home for allowing a patient to stroll out of bed in the middle of the night and go missing. I delved into my mother's theosophical volumes and the Viking mythology for answers to her mysterious insanity. I did research of my own. I discovered in an occult dictionary that light elves hailed from a dimension that is thought to be stacked on top of our own, like the triangles of the Valknut on my mother's body. Stacked on top of reality, but just slightly askew. This world consists of nothing but light from the end of every spectrum. These beings, known as light elves, could bend the light and use it to manipulate the way they appear, or disappear altogether while visiting our material plane. Of course, this was ridiculous, but I found it fascinating. After taking some notes and writing down a few authors' names, I opened up one of the books on Norse mythology I checked out from the library. I left it open to the table of contents when I went to go refill my coffee mug. From the kitchen, I could hear pages ruffling noisily. I was alone in the house. I spilled my hot coffee all over myself, the ceramic mug shattering into a million tiny spears across my tiled kitchen floor. I was scalded badly, but didn't notice. As I made it back into my study, the pages of the book were still flapping wildly, like a poltergeist was playing tricks on me. As I approached the leather-bound book, the turning of the pages decelerated, and as I went to touch the book, it stopped dead. The page it landed on was a full-page illustration of Odin hanging from Yggdrasil, the world tree, with his sides ripped open from the spears of Weird. He hung like this for 9 days until he was granted the knowledge of the runes. He hung and suffered for humanity's sake, like Christ did. I couldn't help but cry. Some invisible presence, was trying to tell me something. My hand found its way to my vest pocket, looking for a handkerchief, without any kind of conscious thought directing it to do so. My finger felt a sharp prick, and as I pulled it away, I found the tip bleeding. Something had poked me. I pulled out my handkerchief that had been in that vest since the day they discovered my mother's body. In it, wrapped up, was a tiny sliver of wood, no bigger than a thorn. On its end was a stain of dried blood. I immediately noticed a small black stain near its base. I pulled my magnifying glass out of my desk to better inspect the dot of black. It had form, but no borders. I pulled out another magnifying glass and turned on my desk lamp. I held the two glasses in my hands, one on top of the other, raising and lowering them, trying to create a crisply magnified image of the black form. What I saw was like a soot blur, a tiny, impossibly tiny scorch mark in the form of a hand. A burn not made by fire, but by the manifestation of a light, so hallowed that it left its radioactive fingerprint in our dimension. The palm print of the fairy folk. I threw the magnifying glasses at the bookshelf in a panic-stricken rage. I flipped my desk over, books and all. "You bastards! You killed my mother!" I roared. A voice replied, cool and calm, like the gentle trickle of a stream over smooth stones. An elf's voice. "Your mother is gliding with us, sacrificed. Gliding on the 8 legs of enlightenment. Gliding in Asgard. Gliding through the world tree. Gliding with Wotan." When I got finished, it read like a fantastic dream. I didn't know if it was fantasy or reality, since I wasn't technically the author, just the scribe. The mythology was unknown to me, but there it was, right out of my head. "Behold, superconsciousness is in the light. The light is in the container. Suppress it not. It will be your new body." How could I write this? I asked myself in the dead of night, in a whisper. The shadows gathered around me. I would later coin these stories, streams, for story dreams. They held ominous signs, prophetic warnings, and subconscious puzzles. They were a portal into the dream world, a special vortex, a singularity forged out of pen ink, and an open mind that connected me to a higher dimension. Tomorrow would be a big day. It was the day I would begin planning my exile. I thought about heading west. This was not a rational thought, just a pineal urge. The shadows hid from me as I waited the watery death of sleep. I no longer hungered for dreams. I would write them instead. I fell asleep, pen in hand. I would spin my own niche into the web and design my destiny. I had blown my horn again, at last. Moses, down from the mountain, never to see the promised land. Enoch could finally begin to build his great pyramid. White buffalo magic.